Hey guys, Char5 here, and today we're doing yet another SpeedPaint discussion. This is another donation drawing. This time it is for... Well, I didn't mention who it was for the last times. This is for another person, another one of my moderators from my streams, and she actually made the amino that my community uses. It was the very first thing that we ever used to like communicate with each other outside of my streams. And it's been a very interesting experience to see what a lot of people post there and how the chats are handled and all that. And what she wanted me to do was her fan character from Ruby, the Rooster Teeth show, which I've seen episodes of. I've enjoyed it. I need to catch up on it, honestly. It's been a while. They're on like season I don't even remember now. They have a lot of seasons, though, from what I can remember. They actually just came out with a new episode not too long ago. And today what we're going to talk about is inspirations. And it's funny that a lot of the times when people are trying to develop a style, they don't really take inspirations into account because they feel like they're just straight up copying someone. And that's understandable, you know. For the longest time, I remember I was in high school still, and part of me was like, how do I develop a style? Like, how do I make something that you can tell, like, oh, that's him. This is something that he made. And I don't know why at the time I felt like that was so important, because I've always kind of been, and I mean, not to toot my own horn, but like I've always been sort of diverse when it comes to art, you know. Like sometimes I'll do something really realistically, other times I'll do something really cartoony, and even then, like whenever I did something cartoony, it was never really the same. It was never really something that, you know, oh, I draw this the same as I draw that. And nowadays, I guess my fascination with it got so big that I eventually did end up developing my own style. And now when you see something, you can kind of tell that it was me who made it. Which, I mean, in some cases I think is good. In other cases, I don't think it's all too important to rush stuff like that. And the reason I mention it is because, again, a lot of artists want to... That's one of the first things that they ask as well. How do I develop a style? How do I develop my own style? And a lot of people online, at least that I've seen, a lot of tutorials, a lot of discussions like this one end up saying, you know, just keep drawing and it'll develop over time. And honestly, yeah, that is kind of how it happens. Like you end up developing a style without even really knowing. You just draw something that you really like, and then you realize, hey, I want to draw this more. So you draw it more, and eventually that's just what sticks. That's how you end up doing things. And a lot of that has to do with inspirations. So I remember some time ago I got asked who my inspirations for, you know, drawing were. And I never really thought of it all too much. But I guess when I was in high school, I looked back on my life and I was like, who are people that I actually looked up to, or like drawings that like what cartoons did I really like back in the day that I'm like, oh man, I'd like to draw something like that. And for some reason, I don't know why, I was like, oh, you know what? I actually really like that kind of 90s anime style, where it's like, it wasn't the really like slim eyes of the 80s anime, and it wasn't like the big-eyed anime of today. It was kind of like the middle ground. Especially because I watched Pokemon a lot as a kid. So the Pokemon anime, you know, it had to take a lot of inspiration from Pokemon's main artist, Ken Sugimori. So I don't know why I look back on it, and that's kind of where I drew my inspiration for eyes. Because at the time I didn't have anything consistent. Like I kept trying to draw like the big anime eyes, but I just wasn't really good at it. And when it came to drawing cartoony eyes, I didn't really like doing it. So I feel like I kind of met a compromise of like, it's both anime and cartoony, and that all comes from Ken Sugimori's art. So I studied it a little bit, you know, how his art evolved throughout the Pokemon games, other things he's done outside of Pokemon, and, you know, you can, I feel like when it comes to the eyes I draw, you can sort of tell that there's inspiration there. I mentioned in the previous video that the way I draw hands is sort of inspired by Butch Hartman, especially on his work with Danny Phantom. Like, for some reason, there was just such an emphasis on drawing Danny Phantom's hands that it was something I noticed immediately. And I don't know, I guess that's where I got, you know, drawing hands more square than a lot of other people, because a lot of people, of course, draw hands with curves, you know, like they try to do circles and, you know, more curvy fists and knuckles, but I look at hands and it's like they're kind of square and cubed. So, like, I think that's kind of where I'm gonna go with that approach. Even like the fingers, you know, even when your hands are open, I still sort of, I don't really always draw them as squares, but I feel like maybe I will start doing that just because I still don't 100% how I like, I don't 100% like how I do hands. So that's maybe something that's susceptible to change. And that's another important thing, you know, like when you're developing a style, don't be afraid to change something that you may not be good at. Like, if you like the way it looks, then yeah, by all means, go for it and keep it. Trying to make what you're doing look good, but, you know, don't be afraid to change your style and you know, until you find the style that you like. When it comes to coloring, I think what a lot of people have done, I don't know, I looked at a lot of color theory videos as well on YouTube nowadays, because for some reason when I was younger as a kid, like, and I'm talking like when I started with digital drawing and stuff, I liked such loud colors, like absolute values. You know, like if it was green, it was absolute green. There were no blues, there were no reds in it. It was just green. It's like, I look back on it, it's like, that looks terrible. Like, it's like they say, like, dealing in absolutes is bad. Like, you should always add a little bit of blue, a little bit of red in those values to make it look more natural, because otherwise it's just like obnoxiously loud and stuff like that. So yeah, when it comes to inspirations, I feel like, I don't know, a lot of Newgrounds animators from back in the day, like, yeah, Ego Raptor, I think is a color theory, like, inspiration for me, because the way he used softer colors or like even tinted shading, I thought was really interesting, and I don't 100% do it all the time. I'm experimenting with it still, like with tinted shading. But the way, like, how I decide on shadows and highlights, I think that was sort of where I kind of got that. Corey Spazkid, who was, you know, a fan of Ego Raptor, a lot of other people would copy that style of shading, and while I don't think I take it to that much of an extreme, that I would still consider it to be sort of an inspiration for me when it comes to shading. I'm trying to think what other artists, I guess in terms of like designs, someone that I got kind of into recently was Tetsuya Nomura, but the problem with that is his designs are so complicated. And I'm gonna talk about it in a later video, but my gosh, are his designs just so cluttered with a bunch of stuff. Like, he does not make simple designs, but in and of itself, I feel like looking at his work has inspired me to add a level of complexity to my own. So while I don't necessarily look to him for inspiration on how to draw, I look for inspiration in him from a design standpoint. Not so much in art, like a purely artistic one, like not just one for drawing, but in terms of designing a character, which is essentially what I had to do here, because all she told me was the description of this character. She didn't have a reference for her or anything, so she just told me like, oh, this is what I see her looking like, and I was like, you know what, okay, I'll see what I can do with that, and this is what I came up with. She told me about her weapons as well, dual fans, and I was like, well, what do I do? And originally what I wanted to do with them was make them very fan-like, like just make them blades. Like I've always liked that that kind of look of the fans are blades themselves, but then for some reason I couldn't get that to work really well, so I figured, okay, well, what if I make it more fan-like? Okay, So add creases in the middle for the fans, and then like the edge will just be like different blades, because I feel like the one blade thing has been done before, and I'm not saying that what I drew hasn't been done, but I feel like it's a bit more of a unique take on it. When it came to the coloring of the fans, I had a hard time like deciding what I wanted to do for it. The reason I added the white, black, red, and green like triangles on it was because she wanted knobs on like the ends where the fans meet. But I was like, okay, well, her hands would be obstructing that though. So how do I do that? So I made these like little like buttons. Like that's kind of how I envisioned them, like little buttons. Not only that, but the edge where the fans meet. The way I drew her hands, I was like, well, you know what? It would probably look better if it was a ring. And for some reason, that I found really interesting. Like instead of being actual fans, they're like handles. So I don't know, that there was something cool about that. And yeah, like that's I think another part of finding inspiration, like looking toward any sort of cartoon you like, any artist, any anime, whatever, and looking at the way they do things, the way they, not only how they draw things, but how they design things as well. I feel like a lot of people don't put a lot of emphasis into the design aspect of drawing or, you know, painting or what have you. It is a process. It goes beyond drawing. It goes beyond, you know, just thinking, what does this character look like? How do I draw the eyes? You know, it's what do the eyes look like? You know, not just how do I draw them, but what do they actually look like? How do I design them? How does this artist draw pupils in comparison to this other artist? And it's a very thin line between like the difference between designing and actually drawing. Like it's a very thin line, but I do think that there is a difference that you can see. I'm really trying to think about what artists, you know, have influenced the way I've done things. And yeah, like back when I was in high school and I decided on the whole Kintsugi Mori thing, I remember it was the first time it was around the time I was like drawing my avatar for the first time. And someone actually saw it. It was like, oh, that looks a lot like Ash from Pokemon. I was like, yeah, okay. So, I mean, technically what I'm doing is right, you know? Like, I am getting that Ken Sugimori feel. The problem is, it's still too Ken Sugimori, you know? Like, people can tell where my inspiration came from, like, right away. So to me, that was kind of a bad thing. Because I didn't want people to look at it and be like, oh, I know what that is, or I know where you got that from. I wanted it to be a little bit more subtle. And I think a lot of people should strive for that. Like, yeah, maybe draw the way that person draws, like your favorite artist, if you're going for their style, of course. But slowly change it. Like, I feel like if you look at my art now, you wouldn't immediately know that that's my inspiration, but if I told you, you'd be like, oh, I can see it now, you know. And I feel like that's what inspiration should be. It should be a bunch of like, oh yeah, I see it. And I think they don't necessarily have to be like Renaissance artists or anything. They don't even have to be contemporary artists. You can choose whichever source of inspiration you want. I personally like more modern, more contemporary artists more because I can relate to them a little bit more. I've just never been a fan of more classic art, I guess. So that's why I look to a lot of cartoonists. I look to a lot of designers nowadays because I mean they're not even the same thing, you know. Design and artist, it's crazy. And I've always wanted to learn design a little bit more because I feel like that would help a lot with my drawings and, you know, have that creativity flow. Because when it comes to, yeah, I think I might talk about that in the next video because we're coming up to the end here. I'm actually showing that I'm doing the background this time. Good. Overall, this is the final product. I do like how this came out. There were actually inspirations from things that I know she likes. Like, for example, the pigtails are inspired from that one character from the Animal Crossing movie, because I know she likes that movie a lot. A lot of, like, her hair color, her shirt color, like a lot of that was described to me. So like I tried to add the most I could to make it unique and not just like, oh, these are pants or this is a shirt. You know, I tried to add a little bit of what I could in order to make it look a little bit more complete and a little bit more, you know, like a character. And overall, I do like it. I like the character. I think she's cute. I want to know like what her story is or what even her name is. Like I don't think she ever told me what her name was. But thank you so much for watching, guys. I will see you guys in the next video where we're going to talk about creativity when it comes to designs. Until then, stay safe and stay awesome. This is Char5 signing off.